The guy that's about to come up here, a lot of you know him. JR and I are spiritual brothers. And we have bonded tremendously because we are very unliked in Alcoholics Anonymous because we try to carry the message and speak the truth. And if you're doing this work correctly, you're going to put the fear of God into people. You're going to scare the hell out of them because you're doing stuff that they know they're not doing. JR is an example of walking the talk. He's literally a walking big book. You spend any time with this guy and you will see a program in action. You will see a guy who's in love with God and who spreads that love across the world. Is he fallible? Absolutely. Do we get on the phone and we call each other out? We have an absolute blast and we laugh, but we do the work. We do the spiritual work necessary. There's a group of POWs that get together. They're from the Hanoi Hilton in Vietnam. They call themselves the Red River Rats. And it's one of the absolute highest honors in my military tradition of flying if you get invited to become a Red River Rat. Because what you're really saying is when your fellow pilots say that's the kind of person you are, what they're saying is, I want you as my wingman, and if we get shot down, I want you in the POW camp with me because you're my brother. For me, JR is my Red River Rat. He's the kind of guy that I want watching my six. When I'm in trouble, I want a guy who's going to speak the truth, not hold back, tell me in love what's going on, and help me get better so that I can share that experience with the next alcoholic. For that, I am tremendously grateful, and I'd love to give you my brother, JR.
My name is J.R. Harmon, and I'm a real alcoholic.
Yeah.
Can we have another round for our Al-Anon speaker, Brenda? I know that oftentimes in Alcoholics Anonymous, people don't ever get people that are in Alcoholics Anonymous never get the opportunity to really hear an Al-Anon talk. And that's one of the things that the Fellowship of the Spirit Big Book Study, which puts this event on. I mentioned that earlier, and I think everybody's aware of that. That's one of the things that in the inception of this group, when it first began, we wanted to include Al-Anon members. You know, that there was a time in Alcoholics Anonymous when there was no Al-Anon. And the Al-Anons actually worked out of the Big Book. As was earlier stated, that's not exactly acceptable conference approved or literature that's recommended in Al-Anon today. However, there was a time when it was, because that's all there was. They didn't have their literature. Our group observes, and you've heard here tonight or over the course of this event, you've heard that we read the long form of the third tradition. The first sentence in the long form of the third tradition says, our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Now, the reason that was written that way, you know, that's the long form of the third tradition, not that, I don't even like to say what it is. I'm embarrassed to have that, the short form that's read today, I'm embarrassed to have that come out of my mouth. And once again, you know, you're going to learn, if you don't learn anything else about J.R. Harmon tonight, you're going to learn that I don't really give a hoot what people think of what I think or what I have to say, because I just speak my truth. You know, our earlier speaker this evening mentioned that her higher power only has one child. Well, so does mine. You know, I'm an only child as well. And I recognize that. All of you are welcome to your own gods, but you can't have mine. And I don't even know, I call it God a lot of time. I call it my higher power. I call it a lot of things because I really don't know what it is. I can't define it. It's the power. And And the reason that I'm not hung up on that identity thing is because, once again, being totally honest with you, I'm not big on what it is. Because I'm more concerned about its power than I am its identity. I don't have the ability to stay right-minded or sober on my own. I need that power. Okay, and that's basically what I seek. I mentioned that I'm J.R. Harmon and I'm a real alcoholic. I'll also tell you that I am not only pleased, and the world's a safer place, but I'm honored to be able to tell you tonight that I have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Now that we know that's a big debate, not necessarily in this room, but in contemporary AA, and notice I use the word contemporary, which indicates that it's not what it started, but what it is today, okay? In contemporary AA, you don't always hear that, recovered alcoholic. You will often hear recovering alcoholic or whatever they say. I'm not too concerned about what they say because they, a high percentage of them, don't die sober. Therefore, I'm not too concerned about what they say. What I'm interested in is what this says. This little book right here is a copy of the larger version in the back. Most of you recognize this. It's the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was sponsored for a while by a man, and I use the word sponsor. He wouldn't like that because it doesn't come out of this 164 pages, which is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. He wouldn't like me calling him my sponsor because it doesn't use that word in here. It calls it a spiritual advisor. So please excuse me for using that nasty word. He taught me that if I was going to be in Alcoholics Anonymous and I was going to live the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I should speak Alcoholics Anonymous. You will seldom hear me use the D word, disease. Because that's not in here. That's the only reason. You know, I know that from what I understand, because I wasn't paying a lot of attention in 1975 in the early 70s, but that's when they decided that it was going to be called the D word instead of an illness, which it's referred to in here. Alcoholism is referred to as an illness, and that's what I generally refer to it as because I live and speak Alcoholics Anonymous. Dave mentioned the fact that we sometimes take a lot of wrath because we speak our piece and tell our truth. Well, I try not to say anything that's not justifiable by this beautiful book that I believe is inspired by a power greater than myself. So most everything I say can be justified by that. Now my personal experience, most of it lines up parallel to this book and what it has to say. Didn't know that when I got here, but I know it today. I would rather tell you the truth and have you hate me than to be quiet and see you die. You or anyone else. Therefore, I will tell you things that you may not care to hear if it is my truth that I'm observing an illness or a problem in you or your program or the program that you're involved with. You know, that's another thing he taught me was that I don't work my program, and I don't work your program, and I don't work a program. I work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is contained in the 164 pages of this beautiful book. The book, I believe, was God-inspired. And it uses the word illness, not disease, and it also says spiritual advisor, not sponsor. I'll tell you what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. Now that we've got some of that stuff cleared up.
We were confused.
Yeah. I like to set the record straight right from the start. And as I heard another individual do in the past, I'll start right off by just making amends to you, because I'm probably going to say something that's going to piss you off. And I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings, but it's my truth. Unusual. Generally at this time, after I make that statement, half dozen or so people get up and leave. Nobody's left tonight. Different energy in the room. Which is something that I mentioned during the break to a couple other gentlemen I was talking to. You come to one of these events with a format similar to this, where people are here to learn and grow in understanding and effectiveness of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's a certain energy, and it doesn't always start out with the real strong energy, but as it progresses, the energy builds. And when you go to many of these other conferences and AA events, the energy is not the same. I see a lot of those events to be nothing more than social events, personally. And I know how to socialize, even without a drink. I know how to socialize. So basically, I'm not interested in socializing. I'm interested in growing and understanding the effectiveness of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't go to a lot of meetings. I have a lot of people that I see from time to time who will say, "Wow, where you been? Haven't seen you for a long time. Are you okay?" Yeah, I'm doing quite well, thank you. Well, where you been? I don't see you around any meetings. Well, you know where I've been? I've been out working the goddamn program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And another thing I hear a lot of times is, how do you manage to sponsor so many people? You can't sponsor that many people effectively. And you know what I do? I look at them people and I say, you know what? Not only would I be able to go to more meetings and have a little more time to get out and socialize, but I wouldn't have to sponsor so darn many people if you'd pick up a couple. Because people don't do that. We've heard it, we've all seen it. Back to what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. Yeah. Yeah, I don't like to talk much about that, what was going on in the past, because I'm living in the current. I'm living today, and I'm having a hell of a life. There's plenty going on. There's enough going on that I ain't got time to plant my ass in a seat at Alcoholics Anonymous every day of the week. I just can't do it. I'm retired now. I don't know how I ever had time for a job. I mean, it's bizarre. I'm not kidding you. I was raised in a little farm town up north here, and there wasn't much going on there. A little farm town. And in high school, hell, we drank a lot of beer and did some other things along with it. And once again, being kind of my family didn't have a lot of money. We actually, Brenda kind of reminded me of this when we did not have a lot of money. My dad was quite a sportsman. He fished and he hunted, and he would gather anything that he could get to feed his family, because that's where we were at. a little secret. I hope there's no game wardens around, but the statute of limitations is probably up anyway. We ate venison year round because my dad could go down in the river bottoms and kill 2 of them a year out of season. Okay, and then he killed one every year during the season too. But that's how he fed his family, and he would go out and he would catch frogs and fish, and he would catch crawdads, and we called them a mess. So maybe them dragonflies are a mess of dragonflies. I'm not sure, but we'd catch them. We had them by the mess, and that's how we lived. We lived a very basic life, and they're really when I was in high school, I knew that if I couldn't get a scholarship playing ball, and that was my dream, was to play football. I knew that if I wasn't able to get a scholarship playing ball, that my family wasn't going to be able to afford to send me to school. And late in my junior year, I had an injury that today, when an athlete has this injury, they work on them for a couple months, and then they start practicing again, and they're ready to play in like 4 months. They're back on the field, active. And back then, it was like shoot the horse. It's over. You ain't playing ball no more. So my wishes and my dreams were like shot down just before my senior year. And I had been very diligent in my. That's one thing I have developed and had since I was a very young individual, was the ability to discipline myself to do something if I wanted to. And I disciplined myself to the point where I would drink some beers, but I never did any of those other mind-altering substances that everybody else in high school was doing, because athletes didn't do that. Okay. Well, when I had the injury, I knew that I wasn't going to be going to play ball, and it was no holds barred. Bada bing, bada boom. Party was on, and. Right out of high school, the fact is, 2 weeks before I graduated, I cheated to get my high school diploma because it meant a lot to my mom. I was the first person in our family to graduate from high school with his class. Okay, my uncle had gotten a GED or whatever they call it, but my mom it was very important to her for me to get my diploma with my graduating class. So I actually cheated, and that's another story that I don't need to share with you, but I was crafty. And got the diploma, and 2 weeks before I graduated and got my diploma, I went to work in Sacramento loading trucks and became a Teamster. Okay, so that started a career. For a year and a half, I worked on the docks, and then another year and a half, I moved trailers around in the yard, and then I went on the road driving truck. Okay, so after that, I ended up driving truck for 47 years. Okay, and I partied a lot, and at one point there, I was hanging out with these friends of mine. We used to have, we like owned this little pizza joint there in Sacramento, and I'm hanging out there one night, and in comes these 2 girls that we knew, and with them was this other young gal, and man, the other 2 were gorgeous young gals, and I was kind of a rough ass, and wasn't too much for the little candy girls. I called them candy girls because they were just so damn sweet, They were too sweet for me. And in comes these 2 that I know, and they're hanging out with these other buddies of mine, and they got this girl with them. And I looked at her and I go, well, that'd be nice, but it was way beyond me, and I tried to push her off on this other guy, and as it turns out, I couldn't get rid of her. She saw something in me that she must have found attractive, and I definitely knew what was attractive about her for me. And we ended up getting together, and we went out for quite a while, and she ended up getting out of school. She was going to Sac State at the time, and she went over to Santa Rosa and got her a job. And I went over there for my birthday to visit her. You know, and I'm going to take my jacket off. I go over to visit her, and we go out to dinner for my birthday. And I'm hitting it pretty hard about then. And we have a nice dinner. We go to the bar and we're having some drinks, and I get to thinking it's my birthday. Might be a pretty good time to pop the question, So I looks at her, I said, hey, how about you marry me, And she laughed at me. Now at that time of my life, when somebody laughed at me like that, they generally, their next movement was to get up off the floor. And that's what I thought about her, was just to knock her ass off the bar stool. And I thought, well, that's not going to enhance your, it's not going to be real good for my opportunities here. So I passed on that, and I looked at her and I said, well, you've been hanging out with me for a long time. I said, why won't you marry me, And she says, person be a fool to marry you. She says, you're wrecking cars, you're getting arrested regular, and you're fighting all the time, you're in and out of jail. And she says, person just be a fool to marry you. And I said, well, why the hell you been hanging out with me? And she says, you're a lot of fun. And so I says to her, I said, well, what? This is 1981, March 25th, 1981. I asked her that night, I said, well, what would I have to do to get you to marry me? And she says, if you can not drink for a year, I'll consider marrying you. Well, I thought that over for a second. I reached out in front of me and I pushed this big old, I remember the drink. I made good money, and I was a heavy tipper. And this drink was a big old screwdriver, nice one. Hardly yellow, just kind of blushed. And I pushed it across the bar and I said, you see that drink right there? And she says, yeah. I said, that's my last drink. In the back of my mind now, I knew that in my pocket I had a couple of joints. Out in my vehicle I had a bag of weed. At home I had a whole assortment of stuff. So it was all going to be good, I said, that's my last drink. I ain't going to drink no more. She said, well, we'll see. And I didn't drink no more. And we ended up in October getting married. And we've been married almost 38 years. So my lovely wife, she mentioned earlier she was married to me. That made me pretty proud. She don't do that a lot. But we go on down the happy road there, living life and raising kids and stuff like that for another 13 years. And I was high most of the time, and everything was okay. It's okay for me, But we get down the road, and I'm driving the truck, and they start this random drug testing stuff, and I go, well, shoot, man, I got to do something. So I did a little research, and I find these clean piss tests. I forget what they called them, where you put the stuff in, drink it, and it cleans you up. Well, you ready for this? They don't work. So I get busted, okay? And here's a mind blower, okay? I've been driving for this company at that time for a long time, about 19 and a half years. And one Saturday they give me a 1 million mile safe driving watch. Big ceremony. Big deal. The kind of driving I was doing was delivering to grocery stores, and some of them were really small, so it was very it didn't happen very often that that somebody was able to do that, get 1,000,000 miles without crashing or tearing up anything. So I get this 1,000,000-mile watch, and a week later, they random drug test me, and I'm busted. Okay, so I'd seen some other guys. I tried that stuff, and I still knocked the thing clean off the scale. They couldn't even measure my THC level. Okay? I'd been stoned every damned inch of that 1,000,000 miles, but by their standards. But nonetheless, I'd seen a whole bunch of other guys get caught before me, and all of them went down to this treatment center, went down to an insane asylum down here in Sonora, and did their 30 days, and they come out and they got their jobs back, and they had to live by some rules, but that was okay, at least I get the job back. So I had myself incarcerated in that insane asylum down there, and I did my 28 days and got out of there, and they still didn't want anything to do with me, and I never did get that job back. But what I did get was something far more valuable. I got a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I started reading that book. They told me when they took me into the place, they said, "We're going to give you this book, and we'd like to see you read it." So I said, "Well, all right." So I didn't know what a text was. Okay, I cheated to get my high school diploma. I was not exactly a scholar. But I get this book, and I know that they tell me, here in a day or two, we're going to take you to a doctor's office to make sure you're healthy enough to sober up, or I don't know what the purpose of it was, but anyway, I was going to the doctor, and I thought, I got that keen alcoholic mind working. I'm going to take that book down to the doctor's office. He's going to see me reading it, and he's going to write it in his report, the guy's reading the book, because they told me they want me to read that book. So I take it down there, and I'm reading the book, and I'm reading it like a storybook, because I don't know I don't know anything about a text. I know today that a textbook is written for two purposes. A textbook is written for study and application. Okay, you study the information, you learn what the information is, and you apply it to something, and there's some results. If you have an algebra text and you use the formula to solve the equation, then you get the proper outcome, the answer to the equation. Well, in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you follow the instructions, you get the result. In our 12th step, it says, having had a result. Okay? Don't know anything about a text. I'm reading a storybook, and I get to page 21, and it says, "But what about the real alcoholic? He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink." And I read that, and I went, whoa. I better read that again. So I read it again, and I go, damn, that's me. That's what happens to me. Because I had quit a mess of times. I had quit, and I couldn't stay quit. That was the problem. I couldn't stay quit, and I went back and started reading that book went back to the beginning of the book and started reading it differently. I still didn't know what a text was, but I was not reading it like a story. And started getting amazing results. There was people coming into that insane asylum and talking about they were doing this. They were sharing what they were like, what happened, and what they were like then, And I said, hell, man, some of them guys have been living on the street and stuff, so if they got good, maybe I could get better. So I started doing what it said and did my 28 days. They kicked me out, and I was about running the place by the time I got out of there. And they told me that the last thing that my counselor says to me, he says, JR, you're a real sick one. He said, you're going to have to go to lots of meetings, and you're going to have to get a sponsor and stay close to this program. So when Carlene picked me up at the place, I told her on the way home we're going to a meeting. She took me right to the first meeting, and that was an experience. This little tattooed guy with a tear tattooed on his face comes up to me right at the front, meets me at the front door. Never seen you here before. I said, well, I ain't been here, you know. He says, well, I'm going to be your temporary sponsor. I said, well, you go ahead on. You know, it was a trip. But it was shortly after that I heard about this men's meeting up near where I live, and I went there, and I was looking for a sponsor because this guy was scaring me. And I run onto this guy that was pretty cool. He was a retired Marine, and he had something about him. You know, people kind of gravitated toward him. He was a peaceful guy. He was quiet, and people smiled at him. You know, they were happy to see him, it seemed. So I asked him once if he'd sponsor me. He said, yeah. And about 4 months after having my mind-altering substance usage ended, I completed steps 1 through 8, and I was making amends. Proceeded along there real good for about 11 years, sponsoring people, and I was putting together some workshops, and I was doing some speaking, and I always took a salad to the potluck and danced at the dances, and went to a birthday night and did all that AA stuff. You know, I was a very active member. I went to lots of meetings too, and I started getting crazy. You know, I'd been through the steps real thorough one time. My sponsor even agreed. You know, you did a real thorough job, JR. And here I am about 11 and a half years down the road, and I'm sitting I was working for a company in West Sacramento at that time, hauling produce, and I'm sitting down there waiting waiting for my pickup to warm up, and I'm trying to decide what CD to listen to on my way home. Okay, this particular day, my world was crashing down because I was becoming what I recognize today to be restless, irritable, and discontented. The insanity was back. And I had been gradually headed that way. You know, Dave mentioned earlier today that our relapse doesn't happen today. It starts long ago. And mine had. And I knew I was in trouble. I was having a hell of a time, and I was trying to find the answer, and I was going to the old timers in the area that I highly respected, and I was asking them what I needed to do. And the one fella says to me, he says, well, you need a checkup from the neck up. So, well, goddamn, what page is that on? You know, at that time I was working like 70 hours a week. Six days a week, and I was going to 5 or 6 meetings a week then. And another one of the fellows that I highly respected told me, he said, you need to double up on your meetings. Double up on your meetings. I said, man, this is insurmountable. In that period of time when I was gradually getting toward my next bottom, I never once considered any mind-altering substance whatsoever. But I got to the point where I was restless, irritable, and discontented to the point where I couldn't live. I couldn't stand myself. Notice that word, self. Well, I find that word to jump out a lot at me in my story. Okay, I'm to the point where I can't stand myself, so the only way out is to do away with myself. And I've been considering it for several days, and this particular day, I'm sitting there getting ready to head for home, and I'm trying to decide 3 things. Am I going to drive straight home Well, let me start at a different area. I'll start right there where I was. What CD am I going to listen to on the way home? I had one disc that I had never listened to. The reason I never listened to that disc, because it was number 3 of a 10 CD set. The 10 CD set was 2 guys on it doing a workshop in New York in 2001. A man named Mark and another guy named Dave. Never met them, never heard them, never knew their voices or anything. And it's CD number 3 of 10. Okay, and the only reason, I was a truck driver, I spent a lot of time on the road with a CD player. I listened to thousands. I got a library that would blow you away of CDs at home. I had never listened to that one, and I thought, what the heck? I'm going to go ahead and listen to this one because I'm on my way home. I'm either going to turn myself into the puff unit for a 72-hour hold, or I'm going to drive onto the house there, and then I'm going to sit down in my special chair and put a blanket over my head and my pistol in my mouth. I know that sounds awful drastic, but it's the truth. And if I don't tell you anything else, I'll tell you the truth. So I put that CD in and I headed home. And I figured I'd make up my mind which of those 2 stops I was going to make on the way home. And I got about 15 or 20 minutes away from the place where I was working. And I'd been listening to this CD, and the guy that started talking on the number 3 CD was Mark H. And this Mark H, I'd never heard him before, didn't know anything about him, tells me 2 things. He tells me what's wrong with me and what I need to do to fix me. And it just blew me away. Brenda used a phrase a little bit ago, defining moments? Was that yeah. This was one of the most defining moments of my life. I pulled to the shoulder of the road. I pulled out my flip phone. Yeah. Had me one of them badass flip phones now. And I pulled it out and called the guy who had given me the CD. Okay, this gentleman that gave me the CD is not here tonight, but he was here earlier today. His name's Ross. Most of you folks know him. I had met him at a Joe and Charlie workshop 3 or 4 months earlier than that. I was in my decline at that workshop. But I called him up on the phone and I said, hey, I got to talk to you, man. What's up with this CD? Where'd you get it? Who is it? And he says, I don't know, man. I didn't listen to it either. I said, well, I just listened to it. And I said, I haven't completed it yet, but I need the other ones. I need the full set. I need them bad. Now, he didn't know the depths of my decline. My ego had been hiding that quite well. A lot of people didn't know. Even those people that I asked and give me that great advice of doubling my meetings and getting a checkup from the neck up, they didn't even know how bad off I really was. But I said, who is this guy? How do I get a hold of him? He says, I don't know, but he says, you remember Chris? Chris, the guy we met a while back? And I said, yeah, I got his phone number. He says, well, he sponsors him. I said, well, okay, that's all I need to know. I'll pick them CDs up tomorrow. Have them ready. He said, okay. I sat right there, I hung up from him on my little flip phone, and I flipped it back open, and I called this Chris guy, and I said, hey, he's in Texas. I says to him, I said, hey, I'm in a real bad way here. You remember me? Yeah, I remember you. I said, well, I'm in a real bad way, and I need to talk to this Mark Houston guy. How do I get a hold of him? He says, oh, I'll give you his number. I hope he can help you. He gave me his number, and I think it was probably from the time I pulled to the shoulder of the road till the time Mark Houston picked up the phone, 8 minutes. Another defining moment. Series of moments, if you may. He picked up the phone, and I told him I was in a really bad shape, and I asked him if he'd help me, and he says, I'll try. He said he would tell me what he'd done. I said, that's all I can ask. And he asked me a couple of questions. First thing he asked me was, he told me, he gave me an instruction. He said, go to page 52, and he had me start reading about the bedevilments. And he says, are you affected by any one or all of those? And I said, yeah, I'm suffering from all of them. You know, the bedevilments are on me. He says, well, those are the most prevalent indicators of untreated alcoholism. I said, yeah, well, you know, what do you do about that? He says, well, have you ever heard of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? I said, yeah, man, I've been doing it. Oh, yeah, I'm doing it. I took a salad to the potluck. Hey, you talk about softball now. I'm on the team. We're the Rebos. That's sober spelled backwards. Rebos. I was doing it all, and he got quite a laugh out of that, and he says, well, what do you do for your step 10? What's your step 10 look like? And I said, well, I'll tell you about my step 10. I said, old Joe Bob up there at the noon meeting, you know, we just went through October, and it was the 10th month, and he talked about the 10th step. So I know what's happening there. I said, I've been doing, you know, I do what he did. He's got 35 years. He must know what he's talking about. He said, Bob Joe or whatever his name was. I remember the guy, but I don't like to use his name. He's passed away. And I guess it was working for him. But he said that he went to bed at night for his 10th step, and he would mentally review his day. And if he'd hurt anyone, he'd pray about it, and he'd make amends as soon as he could. So that's what I'd been doing. And Mark Houston says to me, he says, JR, for you to do a mental review is no different than jumping a dead battery with a dead battery. Yeah. I said, well, that's something. He says, go to page 84. He says, go to page 84, he says, and read to me. And so I go to page 84, and he says, the middle of the page there where it says, this thought brings us to step 10. He says, you start reading there, and when I want you to stop, I'll tell you. I said, okay. I said, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests that we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. And he yells at me on the phone, that's it, stop. I said, yeah. He says, how many inventories does that book talk about up till then? I said, well, just the one in the 4th step. He says, yeah, that's right. He says, what's the rest of that sound like? Where you set right any new mistakes as you go along? I said, it sounds like making amends. He says, that's right. He said, in that sentence, they're telling you that you need to do steps 4 through 9. I said, I'll be damned. He says, read on. I said, we vigorously commence this way of living. And he says, stop. He says, do you remember any place in that book where they use the word vigorously is used? I'm going, no. I remember it. He says, back in step 3, he uses the word vigorous. We launch out on a vigorous course of action. He says he used that word to take you back there to step 3. It says, we vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. He said, cleaning up the past was that first time you went through the steps, JR. He says, read on. I said, we have entered the world of the Spirit. Mark had this thing where he'd go, woo. Woo. He didn't say stop. So I go, our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. He says, stop. He says, do you know what that's saying? I said, well, it sounds like practicing. He said, that's right, JR. He says, if you do something over and over, you're practicing it, and it gets better. He said, if you do it over and over, if you do those steps 4 through 9 over and over, you're going to grow in understanding and effectiveness of those. I'm going, my mind is just going, whoa. I found the key. He says, read on. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for a lifetime. He says, JR, you haven't been treating your alcoholism for the last 11 and a half years. I said, I clearly see that today. I said, will you help me? And he said, I certainly will. I said, well, what do we got to do? And he says, the only thing I know that will treat these is steps 4 through 9. So he said, I suggest that we go back through steps 4 through 9. And that's where I started with Mark Houston. And he sponsored me for about 7 years. He was my spiritual advisor. And I learned an amazing amount of stuff from him. Now, I mentioned that other guy on that CD, a guy named Dave F., who terrified me, okay? Because this guy was talking like on graduate level. And I cheated to get a high school diploma. So I was very intimidated by this individual's what I perceived as superior intelligence, and I was intimidated, and we go on down the road there for a ways, and I never talked to Dave, but I talked to Mark, and I did spent a lot of time with him, brought him out here for a big event, at one point, and him and some other guys, and he was just a huge part of my life. And my life turned around. I learned what being launched into the, what's it say, the fourth dimension? I learned what that meant, being launched, working with Mark. I used to tell people, just grab my feet and hang on, because we're going for a ride. And I was trying to share what I was learning, and what had saved my life and give me my life changed, and it has never been the same. When I started working with, you know what it was? I don't know so much. I was definitely doing the work with Mark Houston, but what the big change was I was working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Finally, and that's what was changing my life. He was the delivery person, but my understanding of God and I was one of those guys that didn't meditate much. I'd tried it, but it just didn't feel good, so I didn't do it. He told me, meditation is just like anything else. You do it and it morphs. He said, if you do it long enough, it'll change. He said, he told me, he said, JR, a major league pitcher does not start throwing the ball 100 miles an hour or 95 miles an hour and hitting the glove every time. He said he goes out and he throws the ball 500 pitches a day, every day, for years. And as he's doing that, he grows in understanding and effectiveness, and pretty soon he's throwing the ball harder and he's hitting the glove every time, or more consistently. And he said, if you do this work consistently, you will grow in understanding and effectiveness, and you'll get better. I trusted him. I didn't have nothing to lose. Hell, I was, close to ending it. Man, I'm sure glad I didn't. God almighty, I'd have missed so much. I'm not going to start telling you about my life today yet. I'm not there yet. Mark passed away. He had a heart attack, and he didn't survive it. And it was a crushing blow. And when that happened, I knew that I needed to find another spiritual advisor, and I started interviewing. Anybody ever do that? Interview spiritual advisors? Well, it was quite the entertaining time, and I sat with a lot of people, and I never found anybody that felt right. And by then I had developed this meditation life that was powerful. And today, my meditation life is one. I could pass up a whole lot. I got 2 beautiful Harley Davidsons, and if it came down to them or my meditation life, and God, please don't bring it down. I'd have to let them motorcycles go. If I had to give up one of the 3, or I don't even want to think about it. But I'm sitting in meditation and I'm interviewing sponsors, when I'm in meditation, I keep getting this same voice, this same word, this same name keeps coming into my meditation. And it's going, Dave F. Dave F. And I'd listen to those CDs several times. And I'm going, damn, that guy's scary, Makes me uncomfortable still. Well, one day I come home from work, and it was the darndest thing because, Carlene's, she's a very 12-step oriented individual as well. Don't sell the lady in pink short. She says to me one day, she says, hey, she knew I'd been interviewing and looking for another spiritual advisor. And she says, I've been listening to this CD on my way back and forth to work. She's got like a 12-minute drive to work. So it takes her a while to hear an 80-minute talk. And she says, I've been listening to this CD on the way to work and home, and she says, this guy's really interesting. She said, you might want to listen to this CD. She said, you might even consider this guy as a sponsor. And I said, yeah, who is it? I said, where did you get it? She says, I don't know where it came from. I said, well, who is it? She says, some guy named Dave F. And I went, boom. That's all I need. It's been coming in meditation, and there's something here. So the next day, I get on the phone and I call Dave. And I think I called him 3 days in a row. And on the 3rd day, I said, hey, I told him what happened. I said, I've been working with Mark, and as you know, he's passed. And I said, I'm looking for some direction. And I asked him on the 3rd day if he'd work with me, and he said yes. And we've been working together ever since. And it's been a hell of a ride. It's been really good. Dave and I have had the opportunity to do some amazing things. I mean, you can't have my experience, but I can share with you my experience, and just going through the steps and refining the work that I did with Mark and with Dave. See, Mark's sponsorship lineage came down from Dr. Bob. Dave's comes down from Bill Wilson. So I've been blessed to receive sponsorship from our 2 co-founders, and there ain't very many people between me and them. So the message I've got from the 2's been fairly pure. I've never heard anybody else share that they've had that opportunity. And what Dave and I, as we went through the steps, I would tell him, that's not exactly the way I did it with Mark. And Dave would say, well, let's talk about that. What did you do with Mark? And every once in a while, we'd make a little change in what my instruction was. And when we were questioning how it was going to work, he would give this little slight change to his new sponsees, and I'd give it to mine. And we'd see how it went. What was the most effective working or wording or whatever. And the work that we do that Dave's been sharing with you this weekend is the most powerful work that I am aware of that's available out there for working the steps. And I've been to a lot of these, and I've heard a lot of people, and we've had some really good speakers here. And I don't know of any of them that touched this work as deeply and as effectively as Dave. we got the opportunity to go to Russia together in 2013 and carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was an amazing gift. A gift. It was a result. It was not a miracle. It's a result of practicing these principles in all our affairs. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result. Spiritual awakenings come in many different ways. I had the opportunity again in 2014 to go back. Dave was unable to make it, but I took another fellow with me who's from similar lineage. He's a Fellowship of the Spirit guy named Tom Ewell. And Tom and I were over there. Dave and I were over there for 8 days. And Tom and I were there for 16 days. We traveled almost all the way across Siberia, speaking in different cities where there were prisons. I carried the message into Folsom Prison for a while. And they heard in Russia they had read or studied or somehow found out about the success of H&I in our prisons here in the United States, and they were interested in starting H&I in some of their prisons. So they wanted us to go across there and talk about H&I in the United States, and share what we knew about it and how it worked in the United States with them. And they have started it in some of their prisons, and they're having good luck with it. I'm still in contact with people over there pretty regular. I've done some workshops. Carlene's helped me. Dave's done some. I've got other friends who've set in and helped me do workshops and meetings, groups over there. Larissa helped me for a while doing interpreting, because I don't speak Russian. Da. On Skype, we do a lot of this stuff. Amazing, the technology and the availability today. So there's been many, many gifts. Our son, what's he got? 5 or 6 years? 6 years. Our son just celebrated 6 years. Couldn't be blessed more. My daughter's an active Al-Anon. I'll tell you a little story. I mentioned to Brenda earlier, we were chatting during the workshop. We weren't paying any attention to Dave. One day, Carlene and I, we both had some stuff going on. We decided we were going to sit down at the kitchen table and write some inventory, both of us. And so we're getting ready to sit down there with our notepads and our pens, and phone rings, and I answer the phone, and it's my son. And I can tell right off something's eating at him. And he says, "What are your mom doing?" He doesn't live too far from us. And I said, "Well, we're just sitting down here at the kitchen table. We're getting ready to write some inventory." "What's going on with you?" And he says, "Well, I'm having some problem with this gal that I'm been seeing." I said, "Well, if you'd like to come over and join us, there's a third seat here at the table." So he said, I'll be right there. So about 10 minutes later, he's sitting at the table with us, and all three of us are sitting there at the table doing 4th step inventory. When we finish writing our inventories, we share them with the three of us, me, my wife, and my son. Talk about a moving experience. It was pretty wild, but I don't know of any family members to this date who have done that and found that all three of them were on the other two people's inventory. It was a trip, but it was really positive and freeing process. It works. It works. You don't have to do it perfect. You just have to do it. One of the shoe companies or one of them athletic outfits says, "Just do it." That's the key. God don't ask us to do it right. He just asks us to do it and to do our best. And he knows if he knows if our heart's right or not. You can't live a spiritual life based on lies. It don't work. I know too many people who've tried. They think it's cool. They think it's all right to steal a can of coffee from the meeting hall, grab an extra book, do this and that, little stuff that's not going to matter. Grab a handful of H&I money. I don't recommend that. My experience has been that people that do that, there's a price to pay for it. And I believe there's a price to pay for everything we do in Alcoholics Anonymous or our life in general. You can call it karma, you can call it the universe, call it whatever you want. I find that I'm better off living a life based on God and finding out that there ain't one than living a life there I don't believe in God and finding out there is one. So I choose to follow these instructions. I've been truly blessed, and I told you I've been totally transparent here tonight. I admitted to you that I nearly committed suicide. I have not always been a model citizen in Alcoholics Anonymous or the planet Earth. My mother told me at one time that I was socially unacceptable. That was my mom. Probably the person on the planet that loved me most of all, even at that time of my life. And she just, with tears in her eyes, Jimmy Jr., you're just socially unacceptable. And I'd been like knocking people out left and right. My dad told me one time, he said, if you keep this shit up, you're gonna have more knockouts than Marvin Hagler. I thought that was the coolest thing. Life changes, and my life has. And had I done that despicable deed, that I was driven to by my insanity, I would have missed out on some cool stuff. I mentioned them 2 motorcycles. God, I'd have hated to miss out on those. My 2 grandkids, I got 3 of them now. And here's a mind blower for you. Every once in a while, my daughter will say, Dad, can you keep my kids for a couple hours? Me, all by myself. She let me keep her babies. Just blows me away. And I do it, most of the time. Very seldom do I say no. And, if I got to go for a ride, then we got to talk about it. But I've retired in the last year. My body's giving out. I'm getting old. I rode this whole thing pretty hard. And nothing's built to last forever, not even the human body. And my doctor, they worked on my shoulder several times, and this last procedure he did, he told me, he says, I said, well, when can I go back to work? He says, man, he said, can I talk to you like I would my own father? He's a young dude. I said, yeah. He says, if you go back to work doing what you've done, I worked in the woods last, hauling logs. And he said, if you go back to doing that, I can't give you a 20% chance of success with that shoulder. He said, if you were my dad, I would recommend that you hang it up. Because the only thing left after that is a complete replacement. And if you have that, we will not recommend at all that you go back to work. So I went home and talked to Carlene, and I said, hey, here's the deal, If this procedure works out well, I might be able to have a little fun and get some things done. But if I go back to work, that's probably never going to happen. And she said, well, we'll get by. We never have lived an extravagant lifestyle. And we ain't going to now. But as long as I know how to poach, we won't go hungry. Tell it, brother. You know, I think we'll be fine. The Lord provides. We're both very strong believers. We went through an experience, and I don't know even how long I've been up here. Anybody got any idea? It's 9:30. What time am I supposed to stop? 9? We went through an experience with my son in 2009. I'm at work. I'm out trucking. And I get this phone call from Carlene. She says, Curtis has been in an accident. I said, yeah, what's up? Well, I don't know. I said, well, how the hell are you telling me? What you telling me he's been in an accident? She says, well, I got this feeling. We believe there's a place in the book where it talks about a vital sixth sense. Okay, we don't hear enough about that. That's another one of those topics you don't hear about in meetings, and once in a while you might see JR in a meeting, and then you will hear the topic every once in a while where he says, share your experience with your vital sixth sense. And I look out at the contemporary AA group, and it's like staring at a bunch of cows that are looking at a new gate. They don't even know what the hell you're talking about. But she has this vital sixth sense. She says, I got this feeling, and she says, I think he's hurt. I hear helicopters and I hear sirens and I hear all this stuff going on, and he just left here for work. And she says, I'll call you back. I said, okay. She calls back in a little bit. She said, yeah, I just talked to Highway Patrol. He's been in an accident. They're life flighting him to Roseville. Well, if they're life flighting him, something pretty serious going on. We live up here in the hills. So I told her, okay, I'm on my way, So I cut my day short, and I get in the truck. I head for Sacramento, and she calls me back, and she says, yeah, he's really hurt bad, and they're taking him to Roseville. I said, okay. Well, they take him to Roseville because his legs are all busted up, and that's where they do the trauma for your legs and your broken bones. Forget what that's called. But anyway, they get him there, and they put him through a CAT scan machine, and they discover that not only are his legs all busted up, but he's got a torn aorta. Now, torn aorta is what killed Princess Diane. Like that. It's a big artery that goes out of your heart and down the back to supply your legs and your lower extremities. Now what, that generally kills people really fast. It didn't kill him. They don't do cardiac trauma there at that hospital, so they put him back in another helicopter. They fly him to the place where they do the cardiac trauma, and I get there about the time they're unloading him, or a little bit after, and everybody's rendezvousing there. My parents are there, Carlene's there, and it was just a terrible scene, and my son went into a coma. They put him in a coma that day to try to settle him down so that aorta didn't go to completely gone, and see if they had time to work on his legs before they had to amputate him. And I think he was in a coma there for 9 days, and for about 7 of those 9 days, we didn't know if he was even going to live. And Carlene and I spent a lot of time near his bed and in the hospital meditation room. We were, tragic things like that are launching pads for spiritual growth. And what we realize today, after going through that, is that it was a terrible time for us, but we were there for other reasons. There were people there who were going through bad experiences also that we were able to be there with and sit with and share our spiritual growth with. It was an amazing thing. They said he'd never walk again. They wanted to amputate the one leg 3 different times. And for the time when he was in a coma, Carlene was very upset, and so was I. But somebody had to make his decisions while he was in that coma. And we're talking about a 23-year-old young man who's got his whole life ahead of him, which we didn't know how long that life was going to be, but whatever there was going to be of it was still to come. And it was really difficult to make some of those decisions for him, you know. And we got through that with a loving God and a lot of good friends hanging out there at the hospital with us. It was a very, very touching time, but an opportunity for growth like you could not imagine. They told us that he'd never walk again, and today he does. As a matter of fact, he's got a baby girl that's like, 7 months old now? You know, and had we lost that young man, we'd have never, that little life would have never been. And had I did that despicable deed many years ago, I would not have been around to live through that or see the baby born or any of those huge blessings that I've experienced. You know, life is amazing. I mentioned that I'm not a model citizen. I called Dave here several years ago, right at Christmas, to tell him that I had punched a gentleman out about 2 minutes before meeting started in the meeting room. That was quite a deal. You know, a guy, he had disrespected me several times at meeting level. And that evening, I seen him approach, and I thought to myself, it's 2 days before Christmas. You know, I said to myself, the guy, he's got it. You know, he'll be different. It's Christmas time, and I said to him, "Good evening. It's nice to see you." And I reached my hand out to shake his hand. He looked me right in the eye with a smile on his face, and he reached his hand out and he goes. And before he finished wiping his head off, he was laying down. Well, I knew that was a mistake right off the bat. And I wished it hadn't happened, you know, and there wasn't no taking it back. The bullet had left the gun. It was over. And I made up my mind, you know, the meeting started right on time, just like always, and I sat there through the meeting, and everything was cool, you know, and I was nervous, and I had my mind made up that I was going to go right over to him after we prayed, and I was going to make amends to him, you know, and man, he didn't even stick around to pray. You know, when the meeting was over, he got up and shot out the door. There wasn't no chance of catching him. So a little while went by. I came back the next week. Well, I went out to the car to go home. I told Carlene, I said, hey, the cops are probably going to be waiting at the house because I think this guy's coward enough to call the cops. Well, I didn't have his phone number or nothing, but one of my sponsees did. So that night I call him, call this sponsee of mine. I get the phone number for the guy, and I'm ready to call him the next morning. I wrote inventory that night, and cops didn't show up. That was all pretty cool. I talked to Dave in the morning, and then I called him and made amends to him. And then the next week, I went right back to that meeting, and at meeting level, I apologized to the whole group. Well, there was one guy in there who had jumped right up when I punched the guy. This other fellow jumped up. They were friends, and he jumped up, and I thought I was going to have to fire him up too. But as it turned out, I didn't have to. And he wasn't there the next week when I made amends at meeting level. And I knew that. You know, he was one of the people that I wanted him to hear my amends. Well, it was like a couple years later. I'm asked to go to another place to do one of these, you know, an hour talk thing. And while we're sitting there, me and Carlene are sitting out in our seats, I see this guy come into the group. I mean, I didn't see him for that whole 2 years. And I see him come in and sit down. And I nudged Carlene. I said, hey, see that guy over there? Yeah. I said, I need to make amends to that guy. He was there the night I fired the guy up, you know. And so it comes my time to speak, and I go up to the podium, and I said, well, I'm J.R. Harmon, I'm a real alcoholic, and I thought I came over here to share my experience, strength, and hope with you folks tonight, but I know there's a different purpose for me being here. And I pointed him out in the group, and I said, so-and-so. He looked at me, said, I owe you amends. And I made amends to that man from the podium. And you talk about a moving experience. And then I went ahead and bored him for an hour. But those are the kind of things that I do now, and the way I live my life, and the way I plan to continue to, living by the principles of the 12 steps as they're contained in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. My life today is beyond my wildest dreams. I feel like it's only just begun. I know I'm on the short end of it, but there's a whole lot of good stuff ahead as long as I continue to discipline myself to do what I've been doing. You know, Mark used to have a saying where he would say, discipline is the horse we ride. And I believe that. You know, I'm not the chosen one. I'm not even one of the chosen. I am just one who has disciplined himself to follow these instructions for quite a while. And it's just become part of my makeup. You know, I've been doing it long enough now that it's just part of my life, you know, to live these principles and to write inventory and to continue to do the things that are requested by a power greater than me. I want to thank all of you for allowing me to talk tonight. God bless each and every one of you.